Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us. It is noon. We have about 46 people plus that have registered. Not everybody's here, but I'm going to get started because we have a lot to get through. My name is Kathy Muchapau. I use she, her pronouns. I'm the executive director for the Metropolitan Regional Arts Council. And I want to have one of my colleagues, AJ, introduce themselves.
Hi, everybody. I'm AJ Jacobson. I'm the communications manager here at MRAC. I use they, them pronouns.
And AJ will help us with monitoring any questions that you have as we're going through the presentation. Please put your questions in the chat, and AJ will be monitoring them and will join us again a little bit later to help us get through the questions. So thank you, AJ. I'm just going to go through a few housekeeping items. When you joined, we've muted all of the microphones and turned off the cameras. I just want to ask that you keep both of them off to avoid any distractions and then to help us have a better connection throughout the presentation. There will be 3 opportunities to ask questions. And like I just mentioned, please put your questions in the chat. AJ will continue to monitor them throughout the entire presentation. You have the option of turning on your closed captioning. You can do that by clicking on the CC button at the bottom of your screen. And as I mentioned, I imagine not everybody's going to be able to join us today. So we will be recording this presentation and we will share it online afterwards. Next slide. All right, so today you're here for MRAC's 2026-27 Biennial Plan. If you are finding yourself to be in the wrong presentation, I would encourage you to stay. We'll be going over what our plans are for the next 2 years. And this will be kind of a higher level. I'm not going to be able to go through every single detail of the biennial plan, but we will have the written plan available for you after today's presentation as well. And then we will have a link for a survey for any additional feedback or questions that you might have for us to consider before it goes to the full board for approval on March 25th. Next slide. So this is today's agenda. I will just briefly cover MRAC's mission and the team behind it. I'll provide an overview of the state arts funding system and what that means for MRAC in terms of our budget. We'll go over some of the demographics of the region. I'll share with you some reflections and outcomes from MRAC's last fiscal year, which was 2023-2024. And then I'll get into the biennial plan and share with you what some of the outcomes of our needs assessments, our goals, and then our programs for the next fiscal year. Next slide. So MRAC was established in 1977 as one of the 11 regional arts councils across the state. We became a 501c3 nonprofit organization in 1989. So we're not the state's arts agency, that's the Minnesota State Arts Board, but we do work really closely in partnership with them, and about 95% of our funding comes from the state, so we're not your typical nonprofit organization either. Our mission is to improve arts access for communities in the 7-county metropolitan area through support to artists and organizations. This mission was built both on what the state legislature mandates for us and what we are determined to do. Next slide. All right, so I can't really talk about MRAC without sharing with you the people behind the work. This is our small but mighty team. Along the top row are MRAC's program staff. These are the individuals that work most directly with our applicants and our grantees. So I'll start from the left to the right. Starting on the left is Zola D, and then Masami Kawazato, Pablo Siqueiros, and Ryan Worden. So if you're ever interested in the work that we're doing, if you're interested in applying for a grant, these are the individuals that you'll most likely be working with. On the bottom row, starting from the left, is Corey Bamer. She's our Director of Finance and Administration. She really helps us do all the work. She does everything behind the scenes, including supporting the program staff. Next is AJ Jacobson, who is on the call with us and who some of you have met. They are our communications manager. They help to develop and create all the materials that you receive from us and to keep us on message and to keep us consistent. Amy Cooper is our engagement manager who works directly with our panelists and is really the lead for all of our outreach efforts. And then lastly is me. I am Kathy Mushbaum. I'm the executive director with the Metropolitan Regional Arts Council. Next slide. Oh, and we also have a 13-member board of directors, which represents all 7 counties, and you can find those names, the names of our board members at our website. So the next 3 slides, I'll be describing the state arts funding system. This is something that is really unique to Minnesota and, in my opinion, has a direct relationship with why we rank as one of the best states to live in. So starting with the Regional Arts Council system, which was created to partner with the Minnesota State Arts Board to make sure that state funding would get into every county and every community in the state. So on the left side of the screen is the map of the state of Minnesota, and it's divided into 11 different regions. Each region has a regional arts council. So as individual arts councils, we're able to serve our region with local relationships, with cultural informed practices and local sensibilities. But we also come together as a forum of regional arts councils. And so I meet with other regional arts councils directors every month. This really helps us to learn from each other, to learn about the communities that we're serving, any challenges and experiences that we're having as regional arts councils. But ultimately, it's really for us to be able to work collectively and collaboratively as a statewide system. So MRAC is also known as Region 11. So as you can see, the metro is actually pretty small. We only make up about 3.5% of the state's landmass, but we are home to about 55% of the state's population. So on the right side of this slide, this is a close-up of the metro, which is made up of 7 counties, including Anoka, Carver, Dakota, Hennepin, Ramsey, Scott, and Washington counties. Next slide. Okay, so, we tried our best. This is a simplified visual of our unique arts funding system. Starting at the top with the taxpayers and the voters of Minnesota. This is really our primary source of funding. So the next tier, you can see on the left side is because a portion of the state's general fund supports arts and culture in the state. And then on the right side is the Arts and Cultural Heritage Fund. So in 2008, Minnesota voters passed the Clean Water, Land, and Legacy Amendment. You can see the logo on the right side there. So anytime you see this logo, you can feel proud that it was funded through the Legacy Amendment. This is the Legacy Amendment is a constitutional amendment that increased the state's sales tax by 0.3% for 25 years. So we're already 17 years into this amendment. Basically, what happens is that anytime you make a purchase, anytime that there is sales tax charge, a portion of that revenue is distributed into 4 different funds. It's clean water, outdoor heritage, parks and trails, and arts and culture. So it really makes me proud that in the state of Minnesota, we value arts and culture as one of our natural resources. You can see how what that distribution looked like in fiscal year 2024. And then 47% of what goes into the Arts and Cultural Heritage Fund goes to the Minnesota State Arts Board. Next slide. So once those funds go to the State Arts Board, they hold on to about 70% of that fund. And then the other 30% is distributed across the state to the 11 regional arts councils. So what that meant for us last year was that we got about $6 million. With that $6 million, we made 312 grants, totaling about $5 million. So at MRAC, 82% of MRAC's entire budget goes directly back into the community. Next slide. I'll just also note that $200,000 of that is from the McKnight Foundation. So we do get a portion of our budget comes from the McKnight Foundation as well. So that's how the funding flows from the state. The next few slides is just going to be showing you the demographic and geographic makeup of the metro. So this slide shows us, well, according to Minnesota Compass, that there are about 3.16 million people living in the metro. Of those, 8.2% identify as Asian, 10.7% are Black, African, or African American, 6.8% are Latino or Hispanic, 0.6% are Native American or American Indian, and 70.8% are white. 2.9% are two or more races. And then we also track individuals with disabilities throughout the entire state, which makes up about 10%. And then 12% identify as LGBTQ+. So it's really important for us to really pay attention to the demographics of the region because it helps us to understand who lives in the metro so we can figure out how to best reach them and how to prioritize both our resources and our programs to meet our mission and vision. Next slide. This slide is really looking at the population according to the county. So we're really looking at geographically where are people living. Again, you can see this information also comes from Minnesota Compass. Starting from the smallest, 3.8% of the state's population lives in Carver County. 4.7% lives in Scott County. 8.5% are in Washington County. 11.5% are in Anoka County, 13.9% are in Dakota County, and then 17.4% is in Ramsey County, and 40.5% of the state's population is in Hennepin County. So this data really shows us that the metro is made up of both urban, suburban, and rural communities. And this is really instructive for us on how we plan to reach these communities. Next slide. All right, so this slide really shows how we at MRAC have prioritized communities. In fiscal year 20, we identified the following communities as priorities based on historical underfunding and underrepresentation at MRAC. So we've identified Black, Indigenous people of color, people with disabilities, and the LGBTQ+ community as communities that we really need to pay special attention to based on smaller application pools, lower funding distribution. And so this is really instructive for us as a staff team to think about how to better reach these communities, how to learn from these communities, to build relationships, and to make sure that our programs and our systems aren't kind of riddled with barriers. This also has informed our funding goals and how we do our programming. Next slide. So at MRAC, we set a couple of funding goals. For our demographic communities, our goal is to fund proportionate to population for individuals that identify as BIPOC, people with disabilities, and or LGBTQ+. And then our geographic goal is to make sure that funding gets into every single county of the region. Next slide. So what did this look like for us in fiscal year 24? In fiscal year 2024, we offered 3 programs. Flexible Support, which was our program for groups and organizations, and they could apply for $15,000 to $25,000. We had 2 programs for individuals, our Arts Impact for Individuals, which was a $5,000 state-funded program, and then which was really about individuals creating arts access with and for communities. And then our Next Step Fund, which is our McKnight funded program, which is $6,000 for individuals to really create a project that develops them as an individual artist. So it's really kind of the difference between our state-funded programs and our McKnight programs is that with McKnight, it's really about the artists developing their own capacity to take the next step in their artistic career. Next slide. All right, so these are just some of our funding highlights, just so you can get an idea of what kind of the volume and where the funding has gone. We received 565 applications in fiscal year 24. That is less than our usual. Usually we get about 1,500 applications, and that was because in 2024, we really spent some time as an organization going through some strategic planning, really looking at, how we were meeting our goals, planning for the future. And so we did not open up Next Step Fund. We did, we fund, what we did was we looked back at our FY23 list, and we funded the next 32 awards from there. So I do anticipate a higher volume of applications in the next 2 years. We made 312 grants totaling 5.02 million. Of those 312, 192 went to organizations and fiscally sponsored group. That was about $4.43 million. 120 individuals received $595,000. And we worked with 162 panelists that reviewed 537 eligible applications. So at MRAC, we don't make the decisions here ourselves. None of the staff is here to really support applicants as they're working on their applications, but we don't make the decisions. We really rely on individuals within the region, like yourselves, to help us read, review, and score the applications. After the scoring process, we rank all of the applications and send recommendations to the board for final approval. So in the last fiscal year, we did reach our funding goals for all of our priority communities, except for the Latino and Hispanic community and the disability community. However, we are less than 1% from reaching that goal. And we got funding into every county. Next slide. Okay, so we want to take some time just to, if there are any questions that you might have, please put them in the chat. Any questions about any of the slides that I have already gone over, the state arts funding system, MRAC's funding distribution in fiscal year 24. Okay. All right, seeing none, you'll have plenty of opportunities to ask questions. So we'll have a few more slides like this.
Kathy, we do have one question.
Okay.
Rebecca's asking for our definition of disability.
Great question. We really allow our applicants to define that for themselves. We don't, we're not asking people to prove to us. You have an option when you're going through our application to self-identify. I think that we have kind of the standard disabilities, whether that be physical, intellectual, but that's really up to, I would say we don't verify for proof. So we're really allowing people to identify.
The next question is MSAB counts seniors as an underserved community, but you don't. Why?
Yeah, we historically, so like I said, in fiscal year 20 is when we identified these communities. This is really based on our data. We are, as you'll see when I get to the biennial plan goals, we are really looking at what it means to, like, which communities are being served here. We'll be spending the next couple of years really looking at who we are reaching and who we are not. I guess to why we just, that wasn't a community that we had identified when we were looking at our data previously. But we are going to be going through a process of making sure that we're serving everybody in the region.
Looks like we have one more question. Do you expect any changes in the priority groups with the country's new administration?
We identify these communities regardless of what the administration said prior to the current administration. We're really looking at whether or not we are serving the region. And so we're looking at our funding distribution across all communities. all identities and experiences. When we made these decisions, it was also, if you all remember, 2020 was also during the pandemic. So we also follow the state, the state's analysis about statewide demographics as well. So we'll really be looking at whether or not we're serving everybody in our region. It's important for us, I think, when we talk about being an equitable grant maker, it is really looking at who has access to these resources and who doesn't. And that's primarily what's most instructive for us as a staff and board for how we set our goals and how we set up our programming.
Great. Looks like that's the questions for now.
Thank you, AJ. Okay, next slide. All right, so now we will get into the biennial plan. The biennial plan is a 2-year work plan and budget outlining programs, goals, and services. And this is really a state requirement for each regional arts council. We're required to submit a biennial plan to the Minnesota State Arts Board before we receive any funding from the state. And so this really goes along with the state's budgeting cycle. That's why it's a biennial plan. Every 2 years, the governor proposes his budget, the legislature goes through that proposal, they determine what is needed by their constituents, and so, we depend on the governor and the state legislature to really be able to come up with a balanced budget. And they rely on us to really let them know how we plan to spend the money that will be allocated to us. And so that's what this biennial plan is. Next slide. All right, well, I just wanted to note that before we dive into the plan, just really keep in mind that this is a plan. Right? If there's anything that we know about plans, it is that this is really a document of goals to guide our set of actions and really our best guesses and our ambitions for how we want to achieve those goals. Like I said before, I won't be getting into the fine details of each program or goal, but we will provide access to the narrative, the plan in more detail after today's presentation, along with a link for a Google form where you can share additional feedback. It's a plan, so we're definitely expecting to learn things along the way. And we could change course depending on what we learn. Regardless of what happens, our commitment is really to listen, to learn, and to be responsible. I mean, to be responsible as well, but to be as responsive as possible to the needs and the realities of the region. Next slide. So every plan starts with the needs assessment. This is language that comes right out of the state statute that the biennial plan must be based on a needs assessment carried out in a manner which ensures input from the arts community and the arts-involved public. The arts-involved public is a term that the Minnesota Office of Legislative Auditors came up with. It was really to ensure that regional arts councils are seeking out feedback from the arts community that they're already working with, but everybody else that is also, whether that be audience members, basically the public that has some stake in the arts community. So state statute requires us to do an official needs assessment every 4 years. But really, at MRAC, we try to build it into our daily work, our annual work, because we're always wanting to pay attention to what the needs of our community is. Next slide. So I'm just going to take us through actually several slides of what our needs assessment process looked like that it influenced this plan. So as I mentioned, we're only required to do a needs assessment every 4 years, but this is something that we do really regularly. And for those of you that have applied to an MRAC grant or is on our listserv or has served as a panelist, you are well aware that we are always asking for your feedback. And so, we're always sending out surveys to find out what your experience was with us. So thanks to those of you that have responded. We really do pay attention to your feedback and informs our decisions. So for this plan, we focused on surveys that we sent out to everyone that applied to our programs, people that sought out applicant services, which is, working with one of our program staff before you submit an application. The survey went to people that submitted and started an application. And this was really, because fiscal year 25, we're still in it. And we focused on fiscal year 25, and we compared those to previous surveys as well. We are currently still in our next step fund process. So the 135 surveys that we looked at are really from flexible support and arts impact for individuals. And then we also sent out a general needs assessment survey, which was about a 20 question survey that was really just asking people about their challenges and their experiences at this time as it relates to creating arts access for the region. With that survey, we received 233 responses. And then in addition to our surveys, we're always looking at our funding distribution. Again, looking to make sure that we're getting funding into every county and every community in the region. Next slide. So this just gives you this slide. Really, these are the questions that we focused on. We're really asking folks, like, what are their challenges and their needs as it relates to creating arts access? And then specifically, what are applicants experiencing as they're going through our process? What are things that we need to consider about our system and our practices? We really want to try to mitigate as many barriers as possible to making sure that we're serving our region equitably. And then in addition, we're interested, in addition to funding, if there's any other way that we can support arts access in the region. Next slide. So this slide just shows you a breakdown of who responded to the surveys. Again, looking at demographic data. So 38% identified as BIPOC, 54% identified as white, 21% identified as people with disabilities, and then 21% identified as LGBTQ+. Of these respondents, about 54% of the groups and organizations shared with us that they have budgets of $100,000 or less, and 21% have budgets of $25,000 or less. So that gives you kind of an idea of the size of the groups that we're working with and the demographic makeup, at least of the people that responded to our survey. Next slide. So what did we learn? 60% agreed that MRAC programs fit their needs as artists and organizations. And what we did in terms of what I'm sharing here is we did combine the survey responses that came from individuals and groups and organizations. So the top 3 responses for biggest challenge with creating arts access was fundraising and funding challenges. So 84% said that fundraising and funding challenges was really a challenge. Again, keeping in mind that the majority of our groups are pretty small. 36% said that they didn't have enough staff or volunteers or capacity. And 26% said that they simply didn't have enough time, whether that be for fundraising or, they didn't have enough time to create the art that they wanted to. I'm also sharing the top 3 responses for additional services and resources needed. And this has been pretty consistent over the years. 40% wanted workshops and trainings, primarily for, other types of arts administration, management, whether that be marketing, recruiting board members, recruiting and retaining volunteers, those types of things, accounting, budgeting, all the arts administrative things that you can imagine. 40% wanted peer networks. And so people, and this this has really like ticked up over the last several years after the pandemic. You know, people want opportunities to meet other artists and organizations in the region. They want to know what people are experiencing. They want to meet up with each other and be in community. And then 28% had other needs. And actually, a lot of this section, people selected this, and then we had an opportunity for people to fill in, you know, what those other needs were. And this is where people gave us more specificity around the types of workshops and trainings that they wanted us to be able to provide. Next slide. Well, and here they are. So a lot of the common suggestions for services included workshops. Again, like I mentioned, marketing assistance, accounting training, board recruitment and training. A lot of capacity needs, staff and volunteer recruitment. So as you can imagine, with a lot of these smaller organizations, many of them are volunteer-led and sustained. And we saw, you know, kind of an uptick in people that were losing volunteers. And so there was a lot of desire around that. How do you recruit and maintain them and retain them? And then there was also an increase in people sharing that they need space, whether that be for storage of their, you know, costumes or musical instruments. There were also space needs around rehearsal space, and then for their final performances. And then finally, peer networks, opportunities to meet peers and potential funders. So this was actually something that has started to increase as well. So as you can imagine, if 84% say they are you know, having challenges with fundraising, they also asked if MRAC could help with connecting them with other funders as well. Next slide. So as I mentioned, kind of our third thing is looking at our distribution. So between fiscal year 23 and fiscal year 24, we received 1,789 applications. So you can see that increase from my previous slide with 500 applications. So we got about probably 1,200 applications in fiscal year 23. An average of about 40% of our funding went to BIPOC communities. An average of about 16% went to people with disabilities, and an average of 40% went to people that identify as LGBTQ+. And we were able to get funding into every county, with Hennepin County being the highest, received about 57% of our funding, and Carver County receiving the lowest with an average of about 1%. Next slide. So I'm going to start getting into the goals that we've set for the next 2 years. But I wanted to first share the statewide goals. So when the Legacy Amendment passed, the State Arts Board and regional arts councils came together to really think about what is our 25-year vision and goals for the Legacy Amendment. The overarching goal is that, you know, we want to make sure that arts are essential for a vibrant society. We want to make sure that people of all ages, ethnicities, and abilities participate in the arts. We want to make sure that the arts are woven into every facet of community life. It's important as stewards, you know, we want to make sure that Minnesotans believe that the arts are vital to who we are, that people trust Minnesota's stewardship of public arts funding, and that the arts thrive in Minnesota. Next slide. So I wanted to share those because those are really foundational to how MRAC plans to do our work. So the MRAC board and staff determined 3 primary focus areas. We are focusing on community impact, organizational effectiveness, and advocacy. Next slide. So for community impact, we're really looking at, you know, everything that is happening externally, everything that is happening outside of MRAC. What is our MRAC and our community on the arts involved public? So the first goal is to ensure that the responsible stewardship of public resources through accountable and equitable grant making. Obviously, as I mentioned before, we are a 501c3 nonprofit organization, but 95% of our funding comes from the state. And so it's important to us that we are responsible stewards of these resources. And the way that we do that is through equitable grant making. We want to make sure that our outreach and our funding metrics for counties and communities is thoughtful and data-driven. We want to assess and respond to grantee training needs and knowledge development. So we will be, revamping our training program. Pre-pandemic, we had a pretty robust program where we offered free training to our constituents around a number of different kind of capacity areas. We want to bring that back. We want to be able to increase applicants in low applicant counties through targeted partnerships, goals, and relationships. And we want to explore different grant making methods, including organizational partnerships and multi-year funding. And then, we do all of this work through collecting and analyzing data to make sure that our grant making process is equitable. For the second goal, is to contribute to developing vibrant arts communities throughout the 7-county metropolitan area. This is really done through positioning MRAC as a convener of artists and arts organizations. We want to hold a strategic presence in communities and community events to deepen relationships. We want to clarify and prioritize engagement to align with our capacity and resources. And then we want to develop responsive and relevant technical assistance services. Next slide. So organizational effectiveness is really looking at MRAC as an organization. This is looking at both board and staff and really building our capacity to be able to serve the community. So the first goal is to support a strong team environment through informed and adaptive practices. We want to develop a collaborative board and staff environment. We want to be really clear about our roles and our communications. We also want to ensure that our board and staff reflect the populations that we're serving. And we want to prioritize professional development opportunities to support staff and board growth so that we can serve our community. Goal number 2 is to strengthen the infrastructure to support programs and administration. We will be spending time reviewing and revising our equity framework to support decision-making and organizational priorities. We will be going through, with AJ on our team, we've been dreaming and wanting a communications person for some time. And so with AJ here with us now, we will be looking at our brand, how we are showing up in the community, really to promote MRAC to the public. This is also, coming out of a time we are a fully remote organization now. And so making sure that we have both a virtual and in-person presence. And then we want to establish the infrastructure for a collaborative and cohesive remote work environment. As you can imagine, MRAC had an office for decades. And in 2020, we went fully remote. We have decided to stay remote, at least for now. I think that when we were evaluating the advantages and disadvantages of a space, it really, being a remote actually allows us to put more of our budget into funding grants. But we're also kind of living into some of the challenges of being fully remote as well, right? So we want to really look at kind of what are the advantages and disadvantages of being remote, both for the community and for our staff team. Next slide. So our third priority focus area is advocacy. I've been talking about it this whole time. Our funding comes from the state. It comes from taxes. It's really important for us to make sure that we have an advocacy presence at the legislature, that legislators and the governor's office is educated about the importance of the arts, and that our communities also understand where these resources come from, and how we are held accountable to them. So our first goal is to contribute to the education and advocacy around state arts funding, including the legacy amendment. I started off this presentation talking about it because it's essentially how we do our work. I will say that, MRAC is about, at least last year, we were a $6 million organization. About 800,000 of that comes from the general fund, and the rest comes from legacy. Without legacy, we'd be an $800,000 organization. And so, our capacity and our ability to be able to provide funding and support to the community really depends on ensuring that these resources continue to exist. Our second goal is to leverage MRAC's partnerships and inform advocacy relating to the impact of arts access and funding. Again, we want to ensure that we are able to position ourselves as an educational resource for public policy decisions and actions related to the arts. We want to make sure that we are supporting the arts community to be our advocate partners. Last week was Arts Advocacy Day, which is actually one of the most well-attended advocacy days at the Capitol. And that was really an opportunity for us to talk directly to our legislators. So thanks to those of you that were able to join us. And for those of you that weren't, I know there are a lot of things going on. We do it every year. MRAC, is really committed to actually advocating all year round. We also want to identify and prioritize participation in partnerships and coalitions. We know that we're not going to be able to do this without our other legacy amendment partners, and that it can't just be the regional arts councils or the arts community alone. We know that arts and culture intersects with all parts of our lives. And so it's going to be important for us to be able to partner with other sectors as well. Next slide. All right, so this is a time when we can collect questions again. If you have any questions based on any of those slides, our goals, our needs assessment, the things that we learned, anything related to those things at all. Okay, seeing none. Again, the invitation is for you to continue to put any questions you have in there. And as I mentioned before, we will be sharing a link to a survey where you can continue to provide any feedback before we submit this to the state. Next slide. So the next few slides are really just to share with you what our programs will be in the next couple of years. MRAC will be offering 3 grant opportunities: Flexible Support, Creative Connections, and Next Step Fund. And then I'll go into a little bit more detail about each of them. Next slide. So our Flexible Support program, this program was something that came out during the pandemic. It was really a time when, obviously everybody was really in crisis. We were trying to figure out how to best serve our communities. If you have been with MRAC for a while, you might remember that before the pandemic, we had about 7 to 9 programs. Each program was very specific, like arts education, arts access, capacity building, those types of things. During the pandemic, we learned very quickly that nobody had time to apply to 7 or 9 different programs to be able to receive the support that they needed to do their work and to keep their relationships with their communities. So we created Flexible Support. And I would say the main difference was that this was an opportunity for applicants to let us know what they needed and how they would best use those resources. So this kind of combined all those different specific programs. So it provides up to $25,000 for organizations and groups to create and sustain Minnesotans' access to the arts. This can be an artistic project that is really just, an art project that they want to create for their community. Or it can be a project that is really about strengthening the organizational capacity and operations of the group. And it can mix both, right? You can say a portion of this will be going to general operating, a portion of this will go to pay these artists for these activities. So that's our group and organizational program. It's up to $25,000. And then MRAC, for all of our state funded programs, we set aside a portion of that budget for groups and organizations whose leadership identifies as either BIPOC, disability, and or LGBTQ+. Next slide. Our next program is Creative Connections, and this is grows out of our Arts Impact for Individuals program. This program is for individuals, and it will provide up to $5,000 for artistic projects led by Minnesotans, individuals that live in the 7-county metropolitan area. So similar to flexible support, a portion of our funding will be allocated specifically for individuals that identify as any of our priority communities. This is $5,000 for a project that does require a community component, whether that is working with the community to do a project, whether that is working with a community of artists to be able to offer something to the community. It just really has to have a community component in order for it to be eligible. Next slide. And then we have our Next Step Fund program, which we've been running for over a decade now. This is funded through the McKnight Foundation. And this provides up to $6,000 for professional artists in any discipline for the purpose of career development and artistic achievement. So as I mentioned before, the difference between Next Step Fund and Creative Connections is that with Next Step Fund, the artist is essentially the project, right? This is an opportunity for you to focus on yourself as an artist and what you need to build your capacity to continue to create art in the region. Next slide. All right.